Turning now to Palestinian journalists and activists and the twin inescapable realities of surveillance and censorship. Since 2015, the authorities in Israel have arrested an estimated 1,000 Palestinians for content they published or shared online. Israel even has a dedicated cybercrimes policing unit. With the cooperation of tech giants like Facebook, the state has successfully taken down hundreds of Palestinian social media accounts. And Israel's strategy in this area goes well beyond censorship. The state has developed algorithms that monitor Palestinians in anticipation of them committing a crime. Silenced and surveilled by Israel on one side, Palestinians are also having to contend with the Palestinian Authority, the PA, on the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza, neither of which is known for tolerating dissent or criticism online. In the West Bank in particular, the PA's 2017 cybercrimes law has led to the arrests of numerous Palestinians. The Listening Post's Tariq Nafi now from the occupied West Bank.
This past week, Ali Dar Ali became the latest Palestinian journalist to be charged with incitement. The Palestine TV correspondent is known for his live broadcasts of life under occupation. The Israeli military reportedly took issue with videos he shared of soldiers in a refugee camp near Ramallah. None of Ali's posts call for violence, but both the military prosecutor and the judge referred to the size of Ali's audience, the number of followers he has, and the likes he gets. And it's not just journalists. 15-year-old Tamara Abu Leban was arrested for writing the words "Forgive me" on Facebook. Her alleged crime: incitement. Nariman Tamimi's crime was live streaming her daughter's now infamous confrontation with two soldiers in her front yard. She was charged with and then convicted of incitement. Just a few examples, and there are hundreds, of a charge Palestinians say has been used to criminalize criticism of the occupation.
The general assumption nowadays is that all Palestinian social media users are under Israeli surveillance. They developed algorithms which monitor social media for certain keywords, and later began using a profiling method known as predictive policing. Anything you say can be seen as incitement. The poet Darin Tatur was just imprisoned for saying, "Resist, my people, resist." So the word resistance is forbidden, as are phrases like, "I'm against occupation" or "I will resist occupation." It's all considered incitement.
There are very sophisticated methods of online surveillance. With these algorithms that have been developed, the technology that is being used, it targets anyone exercising the right to free speech. What we're seeing is a violation of the presumption of innocence. People are not presumed innocent, they are presumed guilty from the start.
Israel does not hesitate when it wants to silence its critics, whether Arabs or Jews, to invoke the security argument.
כשאנחנו עוסקים בטרור צריך להבין ששורשי הטרור נטועים על פלגי מים של הסתה.
Any criticism of Israeli policies is, from the Israeli point of view, threatening to state security.
In 2016, Israel's Minister of Justice, Ayelet Shaked, boasted that Facebook complied with 95% of government requests to remove inciting content. A new Facebook bill in the works would give the government the power to make that 100%. The ministry told the Listening Post that incitement cases are examined regardless of the nationality or origin of the suspect. But there seem to be double standards at play. Shaked herself once wrote a Facebook post that appeared to justify the mass murder of Palestinians who give birth to little snakes. She was not charged with incitement. And in 2017, the NGO Hamla found that Israeli social media users wrote an inciting post against Palestinians once every 71 seconds. However, prosecutions of Israelis for incitement are extremely rare. Censorship and monitoring are not the only ways Israel controls Palestinians online. It also operates social media accounts that target Palestinians with propaganda in their own language, a practice known as the militarization or infiltration of the Palestinian cyberspace.
You have pages like the Coordinator, an Israeli general who publishes information that mainly targets Palestinians, and sometimes makes threats like, "We will enter this area in Gaza to occupy it again," or pages like "Bidna Naish, we want to live," which has a photo of dollars luring people to work with them. Then there are secret accounts like that of Captain Hussein, an Israeli intelligence officer who writes to people and asks if they need help getting a work permit. In other words, they play with Palestinian emotions as well as their need for money to get them to work for them.
After a summer in which Israeli snipers killed more than 150 people in Gaza, including 2 journalists, and were even caught celebrating some of those killings, the Israeli government announced plans for legislation that would outlaw filming Israeli soldiers for, quote, the sake of shaming them. Then there are the more traditional methods of controlling information. This month, the Israeli military arrested 6 journalists for incitement in a single week. At least 23 journalists are currently imprisoned, and 17 media institutions were shut down by the Israeli military last year. But navigating Israel's system of control is only part of the challenge. Too often, Palestinian journalists have come to expect the same kinds of intimidation, surveillance and monitoring at the hands of their own government in the occupied West Bank, the Palestinian Authority. Seen by many Palestinians as an enabler and enforcer of Israel's occupation, the PA seems to have learnt a thing or two from the Israelis.
The most commonly deployed charge is incitement. One doesn't want to draw a parallel, but often those who've experienced Israeli prisons have also experienced PA prisons. It's as if there's a certain type of journalist who must be denied a voice. The surveillance of what we write on Facebook has become so extensive, so sophisticated, that I believe we will get to the point where it will include the political and social views of journalists too.
Taking the lead from countries like the United Arab Emirates, the Palestinian Authority has adopted a cyber crimes law that has had a chilling effect on free speech in the occupied West Bank. It was conceived almost overnight, with no public consultation, and then passed by presidential decree.
In its first year, the law was used in a way that violates human rights and democracy. At least 30 Palestinian websites have been banned for either criticizing the Palestinian Authority or for having alliances with Hamas or Mohammed Dahlan. The law has been amended, but is still nowhere near perfect. The point is, they're using various laws in a selective way to limit opposition voices.
We're seeing that it's used in an abusive manner. It is not used to tackle online crime. It's used to restrict opposition and anyone addressing points that are not supported by the Palestinian Authority. So we're still calling for a repeal of that law or an amendment of it that would be in line with international standards.
Then there's Gaza, which is under the control of Hamas and where free speech is also heavily restricted. Security forces there have used harassment, interrogations, and arbitrary arrests to silence online criticism. But what seems to differentiate the PA is the frequency with which it pursues journalists who are also being sought by the Israeli military. One such voice is Lema Khater, a writer with a large online following, known for her criticism of the occupation and the PA. She was arrested by Israeli forces in Hebron last month, not long after her family had been harassed by the PA.
In April, I spoke to Lema Khater. The Palestinian Preventive Security Forces had detained her husband. She told me they asked him, "Why don't you stop your wife from writing? Aren't you a man?" And he replied, "I am a man and agree with what my wife writes."
Given the ever-present threat of surveillance and arrest by Israel, plus the threats coming from their own leadership, Palestinians are increasingly cautious about what they say online. A study by Palestinian NGO Meda found that 90% of journalists practice self-censorship out of fear for their own safety.
For people to know that they are being surveilled all the time, whether they are aware of it or not, creates fear on the part of the population. Fear leads to paranoia, leads to feeling that their life is totally monitored, is totally controlled.
المواد اللي احنا بننتجها بيتم متابعتها.
All of our journalistic output is monitored and analysed. You feel as if we've somehow become like that TV program, Big Brother. Everyone is watching you. Israel is watching you. The PA is watching you. There is censorship, but Palestinian journalists can navigate this ever-narrowing margin of freedom. Because the moment the journalist goes silent, there is nothing left.
وبخاف أنا بعتقد إنه ما بضل إشي.
And finally, the 18th Asian Games are well underway in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. A television channel there, SCTV, produced a video to mark the opening of the Games, featuring Indonesia's President Joko Widodo beating a traffic jam to get to the stadium on a motorcycle, stunts included. Lame comparisons were reflexively made online to Tom Cruise in the latest Mission Impossible film, which was mission accomplished for SCTV and its action hero president. And a hashtag was born, proud to be Indonesian. Fine, except whoever made that film should have picked a stuntman who better resembled the president in shape. Someone in the same weight class, perhaps, and given that stuntman a wedding ring to match the one that Widodo wears. That's what the continuity department's for, the little things. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Indonesia, Gelora Bung Karno. Ya, biarkan saja.
Please welcome the President of the Republic of Indonesia, His Excellency Mr. Joko Widodo.
Hadirin sekalian, mari kita sambut